Hello, everybody, and welcome to Intro to Cosplay. Yesterday, Sparks, Moss, and myself hosted our cosplay contest. We hope that you enjoyed it, and don't worry if you missed it. All of our panels will be re-uploaded for you guys to be able to watch at a later date. If you don't already know, my name is Chally, or also known as Challenger Girl 9 on Twitter. I'm most well known for my G1 Ratchet rig. As you can see, I'm wearing his head. We're here today to show you tips, weird tricks, and even some mistakes that we too have made throughout our own personal cosplay building experiences. With that being said, we hope that you sit back, relax, and enjoy the panel. Also, please make sure to hang out towards the end. We're going to be having a live Q&A session. Now let me get out of here and out of the way and allow my two amazing friends Sparks and Moss to introduce themselves next.
Hello everyone, I am back once again. I am Spark Splitter, but you can call me Sparks. And today I have returned as your not-so-friendly neighborhood swindle to help give you guys a crash course in all things Transformers cosplay related. That includes material use, various primers, what to use, what not to use, cosplay safety, how to properly manage within your rig suits, and how to be a proper handler. Everything from chest binding for gender-bent cosplays and more. Please tune in. We'll be taking questions at the end, and I can't wait to show you what we've learned. Learn from our mistakes. That's the best way to learn.
Oh hey, didn't see you there. I am Retgar. Actually, I'm a statue of Retgar. Actually, I'm a statue of a cosplay of Retgar. Moss's cosplay to be specific. They couldn't get dressed up in costume to make this video, but I'm here to stand in. Anyway, I'm really excited to have you all here to see this costume event. We're going to talk about all the different ways that you can make your own mech costume, be it an actual rig, a human former, or a lot of different ways in between. So let's get started.
With that, it is time to get started on our panel. So welcome to Iacon Online 2021 Intro to Cosplay. And here we have three stooges, with myself, Sparks, as Swindle. We've got Frag Raptor in the middle as Retgar, and on the end we have Chally, Challenger's Girl, as Ratchet.
Types of bot cosplay. We have Humanformers, and they don't really have much armor on them. Usually the face is visible. Once in a while they're wearing a helmet. Sometimes the mech head is worn too, kind of like what Sparks and I did in our intros for this cosplay panel. And usually you have clothing and accessories designed to look like the bot. Continuing, we also got the full rigs, and that is literally the robot from the show. It's the entire mecha. There's usually no clothing unless you are wearing a bodysuit underneath or a cape, as an example. For me, it was the ballerinas wear it. I believe it's called a leotard to get the red portion on my cosplay. But yeah, there's not really a lot of clothing on these.
Picking the right cosplay can be a challenge, but not because of the character. You can cosplay any character that you want, but the things that you really have to keep in mind is your budget, your time limit, how you're going to travel with it, and your skill level. So if you haven't had a lot of experience with cosplaying before, you might want to start with a human former or something that might come off as a little bit simpler to do, as opposed to diving into a full rig right off the bat. Something that you don't have to worry about when picking the right character, though, is your gender, your body type, your ethnicity, or anything else that you can't or shouldn't change about yourself.
Getting started, particularly human formers. As you can see with this slide here, this features myself, again, Sparks, and you can see my concept drawing here on the left and the final costume on the right. Things you need to consider when designing a human former or partial. What parts do you want to have armor? What kind of clothing do you think the bot would wear? It's very important to think about the bot's attitude, personality, and style, trying to match them with a more human look. Like Cup, for example, is a very military style bot, so you'd figure a more military style uniform. For Rodimus here, I went with more of a punk look while incorporating some of the armor from the bot.
When getting started with a rig, it's a little bit different than working on a human former. Instead of worrying about designing an outfit, your focus should be more geared towards designing your armor layout. So, for example, if you're going to have shoulder pauldrons or any other part of armor that's going to be in an area that moves a lot, you want to figure out how you're going to attach those pieces to the other pieces of armor so that you're not restricted in any way. You also want to try and figure out a way that you can easily make them all removable so that in cases of emergencies, or if you have to use the bathroom, that you can take the armor off as easily and simply as possible. This also helps for travel when you have to move from one place to another with conventions that are in maybe a different town or a different state or a different country. Another thing that really matters with this is proportioning. That's why you can see my drawing off to the side there between Retgar's proportions and my proportions. There are certain parts of him that aren't going to meet a real human's body, his shoulders being the best example. That's why on my costume I designed my shoulders to be extra big to try and meet his proportions, even though they aren't how a real human body is shaped. I've got a good example in the next slide here. As you can see, this is another unrealistic expectation of women. Here's a slightly more realistic version of the proportions on a human body type. There are a lot of characters who you just won't be able to make yourself look exactly like them without having to really dramatically push proportions and create the illusion of their body type instead of using your actual body for it. We have a really good example on the next slide of that. By building pieces that are bigger than your body and that connect differently, you can create the similar proportions to the characters. But this is something that's a lot more advanced, and beginner makers maybe should start smaller than something as big as this, literally.
Another really important thing, and this also applies to Humanformers as well, besides rigs, is to do your research. Do not, by all means, just dive right on into buying random materials without any plan, because you're going to start wasting money. Let me tell you that right now. Do the research on what kind of costume you want to make and the materials that are going to work best for your design and budget so you don't waste money and you don't waste materials. Don't start making pieces of a costume at random without any idea what the full costume's going to look like. Sketch something out first, like Frag was also showing in the last slides. Do not just start building an arm and a leg without any plan. Make sure you build some sort of blueprint or a rough idea of your goal and use that to help keep track of the pieces as you go. It's really going to save you in the long run.
Budget and materials. And this is a very general breakdown. Obviously, depending on what you use, you'll fall in different categories here. This is just some suggestions based on our own experiences. So, $0 to $50. You start pretty simple. Generally, a Humanformer, a closet cosplay, basic materials, pre-made clothing, wigs, accessories. Check your local thrift stores. You can find some great stuff that you can either repaint, modify. Don't be afraid to poke around those places. About $50 to $100. Foam's a great place to start. Partial, helm former, gloves, easily fit within this budget. A full build, probably not possible, but you never know. Maybe you want to build it out of cardboard instead. Most rigs fall between $100 and $500 depending on what you're using. Thermoplastics here are definitely an option. Fabric over foam. The more detailed your rig, obviously the more expensive it's going to end up being. The bigger you go, the more it's going to cost, particularly with a bayformer. All that detail. You can make a standard build within this price range, but things like platform shoes, wings, guns, any kind of lighting up accessories will drastically increase your cost. Most of the IDW and previously mentioned movie bots will fall here, and we'll talk about what types of materials are best for you as we move on to the actual construction.
All right, getting started from scratch. Starting from nothing. So you don't need expensive and professional equipment to start templating stuff out for your rig. One thing that I used to do when I built mine is, as you can see in that picture, that's all made out of cardboard. I just dug right into my recyclables, pulled out a whole bunch of boxes, and started using that as my template. If you don't have cardboard, you can get other materials. You can use cardstock or poster board. You can get those at thrift stores or dollar stores for really cheap. And to hold those together in this picture, I was using both duct tape and I was using shipping tape to hold the cardboard and the cardstock templates together. I would highly recommend using the shipping tape on the cardboard bits because it's easy to pull off. Because once you make the template and you make sure everything fits good and it looks good, you'll need to cut that tape or pull it off so then you can start using the templates on the foam. The duct tape is better for when you, as you can see in the picture, I was testing the leg and making sure when I would eventually build straps, it would work with the foam part, which is around my waist there. So the duct tape had to be a stronger tape to hold the cardboard and then it against the foam. But yeah, use shipping tape on the cardboard bits so it's easy to cut apart.
A really useful tool for when you're getting started making your mech costume, or any costume for that matter, is a duct tape dummy. It can be shortened to DTD, but most people just say duct tape dummy. All it is you take an outfit or cheap clothes that you aren't going to care about if anything happens to them, but usually a painter suit is easiest. And you wear that and you take a few rolls of duct tape and tape yourself up and have a trusted friend cut you out of it. And then you tape it back together after stuffing it with newspaper. This creates a body form of your exact proportions that you can work off of while making your pattern, making your armor. You can put pins into it. You can hot glue stuff to it to hold it in place. You can really abuse it in a way that you wouldn't want to do with your own body.
I do want to quickly add in here, I cannot emphasize enough trusted friends because A, they'll either trap you in there and you cannot get out on your own, or B, there's a good chance they're going to see you in your underwear because they got to cut you out and that painter suit is now one with the duct tape.
Now that you have an idea of what it is that you want to build, you can get started with your pattern. Pattern making is something that takes a lot of trial and error, but just stay consistent with yourself. Don't be afraid to mess up. Start with something cheap like paper, cardboard, anything that's easy to cut up and tape back together, and keep playing around with your shapes until you have something close to what you want. You can also use a lot of pre-made pieces, pre-made patterns that are out there. Some of them are free online, others are pay to use, but a lot of them are like a base template that you can alter into the shape that you think would better fit the costume that you're looking to build.
All right, now we are moving into materials. And just a little disclaimer, these are all materials that we have worked with. There are going to be plenty more out there that we have not experienced. So we're just giving our best information with the ones that we've used. So starting off, foam. Foam is the most common material that rigs are made out of these days. The most popular is called EVA foam. It is a dense foam sheet. It can be glued, cut, sanded. Pretty much it's an all-around favorite. It comes in lots of colors and thicknesses. Even that really thin foam that you find in craft stores can be EVA foam, although I would shy away from using the really thin stuff. It's not going to give you much support at all. If you're lucky, maybe you have a 5 and below near you, also Walmart, places like that. You can find the puzzle style anti-fatigue floor mat. You can see a picture of that in the middle. And this also works really well. Problem is, usually one side of it has a texture to help it grip the floor, but you do get one smooth side. I believe Retgar was made out of a lot of this type of foam. So it's a little bit easier to find. The EVA foam, you're generally going to have to order online. And in the last picture, we have foam clay. Foam clay is a little bit newer to the scene, and it's great for sculpting fine details, maybe a lip or a nose or any kind of fancy little flair on the armor.
Ratchet was actually built out of all three of these materials, the rolls, the mats, and the clay foam. Besides making shapes with clay foam is great for filling in gaps, and you can sand it down like Sparks was saying. But if you put your EVA foam pieces together and they fit nice before gluing, and then you glue them together and there's like a little gap or a little hole, clay foam is a wonderful, smooth, easy to hide way before sealing and painting to fill in those gaps. It's a wonderful material. I highly recommend it.
So when you're working with EVA foam, you can get started with just a hot glue gun and a pair of scissors if you really want to. But for a more professional look, we're going to go over a couple of tools that can really help you out. Some of these tools and materials that we cover, though, can have some hazardous fumes. So right off the bat, do not use anything in this list without having a respirator first. This is not something that you can skip. Your health comes first, and it's not worth using these if you're not wearing a respirator. For an adhesive, hot glue is fine, but Some of you who have used it before may notice that hot glue, when it dries, can have some chunky overspill and those annoying strings that kind of hang off of things, and it's just more pain than it's worth when you have something like Barge contact cement. Contact cement works by just kind of slathering on the cement on both sides of the thing that you want to stick together, letting it dry for a couple of seconds, and then sticking it together. They'll hold and never let go. The only downfall is it does have fumes, so that's where the respirator comes in. When it comes to using the Dremel, this can be useful in virtually every way you can imagine. It can help for cutting, it can help for adding details, it can help for sanding. You can use this Dremel for virtually everything you can think of when it comes to working with foam. If you use a Dremel, though, you absolutely have to wear goggles with your respirator because the particles will go everywhere and they will stick to your eyeballs. The last thing on this page is the hot knife. A hot knife is just a tool that gets really, really hot. It comes with several different tips, including a knife, which is very useful for cutting out the pieces of the foam with ease. And the other tips can be used for drawing in details on the surface of your foam. But again, this does let out fumes. So back to that respirator.
Continuing on with foam working tools, we have up first the X-Acto blade, also a box cutter. This is probably your most useful tool because a lot of the foam you're going to use is probably going to be 1/4 inch thick or thicker. The most important thing with this is to keep the edge sharp. Foam will deteriorate the blade pretty quickly. And make sure you always cut away from yourself and watch where your fingers are when cutting. Please learn from my mistake. So it's recommended to get a blade sharpener for that. The cutting mat is also really helpful. It will save your floors, your tables, whatever you're cutting on. I've also used cardboard in the past before I've had one, but I do recommend picking one up. Not necessary, though. Another hugely important tool is the heat gun. This generates an extreme amount of heat. Make sure you never touch the end of the heat gun. Again, I've done this by accident, and it's not a good time. But this will actually close up the little tiny cells in your foam and make it much easier for painting and sealing later. So it's really recommended to close up your foam cells, as well as it can help you shape the foam itself. So if you have a flat piece, you can make it more circular or a dome or pretty much anything you need. But please use extreme caution with the heat gun. It is in no way a toy. And of course, as Frag mentioned, we have the safety glasses, not needed for anything on this page, but definitely for the items Frag had talked about.
And I just want to add with the heat gun one more thing as well, guys. Do not put the heat gun too close to the foam, and do not leave it in the same section too long as either, because it will actually burn your foam. So definitely make sure you keep it a couple inches away. Not too far away, but a safe distance. Like, 'cause if you're drying your hair and you are moving that heat gun, do not let it sit in the same spot very long, because like I said, you're going to burn the foam, and that is a waste of product, which you don't want, because that's money down the drain.
Moving on, we are moving on to basic foam sealers. Again, these are for foam before painting and not for the thermoplastics. The first one up, Mod Podge. You can find this in pretty much any craft store. It's a pretty common item, and you can use those sweet, sweet crafting coupons. It is a water-based glue. It'll coat the outside of the foam and help seal over any little pores that are left. Generally, you have to do 3 to 5 layers to get a pretty good smooth surface, and always use a soft brush to avoid brush strokes, and you could water it down a little bit just to make it a little more runny. You might need a couple more layers though. The next item is Plastidip. Won't find it in craft stores, but stores like Walmart, your general superstores, auto repair shops, you can find it in. It comes in a can, a liquid pan, or the spray type. I recommend the spray. It's a little bit easier, less messy. Comes in several different colors. I recommend just using black, but if you have, another base color, you could use one of the others. I've only ever seen it in black and white around my area, though. In my experience, I can use my Plastidip straight onto foam. It is important, though, not to do it in direct sunlight. If you leave Plastidip in direct sunlight on your project, there is a chance of getting bubbles, speaking from experience.
Do be mindful of your region and the humidity in your area, though. Sometimes Plastidip can have some issues with pilling up and not laying flat or not self-smoothing itself. So if that ends up being a problem, you can use 2 layers of Mod Podge first and then go back over it with Plastidip, and it shouldn't have a problem.
So continuing different kinds of foam sealers, we have Prop Monkey Studios and Flex Bond. So Prop Monkey Studios, they have Prime, which is a first coat for EVA foam. It smooths things out and helps paint adhere. We have Rapid Fill, which fills in dents and holes in the foam. It's sandable, which is really nice. And then we have Fine Finish, and it gives the smoothest finish. It's perfect for metallic paints. It's a wonderful product, let me tell you. When you glue EVA foam together, especially with helmets, you can get these indents from the seams being together, and this stuff really, really helps smooth it down, and it can really make your helmets feel smooth. And you don't have to just use it on those parts, the creases. Like, you can use it on the whole helmet or whole parts of your cosplay. It will get a little expensive though if you do the entire cosplay covering it up in this. I wouldn't use this stuff as a sealant on its own. I used it more as a finishing touch before I put in my sealer, which brings me to Flex Bond, which for my cosplay was my sealer. It's very similar to Mod Podge, but it's better. Now, as you can see on the bottle in the picture, it says Flex Bond for Warbler, but the lovely trick is it's not just for Warbler. You can use it on EVA. It has a high surface tension, it gives a smooth surface, it's water soluble, they're easy to fix any drips and runs, and you don't have to repair a large area. And if you do mess up and it comes on too thick, you can actually sand it down and then reapply it, which is wonderful. You could sand it down with a little bit of water on a sander, and that will get it off, and you could reapply a nice smooth layer. It's non-toxic. You can use it in small spaces. I still personally use it outside because it is a little messy. It does feel like glue, and it remains flexible. What's a cool trick with Flex Bond is if creases happen, let's say it gets a little bent, if you use a heat gun or a hair dryer, a little bit of heat should fix that. And the other thing with Flex Bond is, just like Mod Podge, you can water it down a little bit as well. It will help. I do highly recommend watering it down a bit because it's a little too thick completely on its own, but it's a great sealer. I highly recommend it for EVA foam.
I do quickly want to point out these two, the Prop Monkey and the Flex Bond, you're not going to find in a store. They're going to be pretty much online only, as where Mod Podge and the Plasti Dip are much more easy to find and going to be probably cheaper as well. Okay, so here we have a foam sealing example. In this case, it's my Plasti Dip, and you can see here my Swindle helm. And the first image you can see, that's all raw foam. It's just two different colors. The next one is just straight Plasti Dip. There is no Mod Podge under him. And the final one is paint. And the paint is just directly on top of the Plasti Dip. I didn't have any issues, but again, if you're in a high humidity area, you may need to put down a little bit of Mod Podge first. All right, now we are moving on to some foam build examples here. And first we can see Retgar, which is Frag Raptor. In the middle, we see IDW Style Grimlock by Raven Slate on Twitter. And on the end, we see Rat Trap by Kittenfishes on Twitter. This is a foam build of Rat Trap. You'll see a slide later on that features a thermoplastic build of Rat Trap.
Now we're going to move on into thermoplastics. Thermoplastics come in a wide variety of different types, so we'll start with the first one here. It's called polycaprolactone, but we call them melty pellets for short because it's easier. They come in many different types. Friendly plastic is generally the most common one, but polymorph is quickly making a comeback. They come in different colors, but you'll usually find it in white. The way it works is you heat it up, and you can do this with either a heat gun or by boiling them, and then they become very soft and moldable. You can either sculpt with them or press them into a mold, and once they cool off, they solidify into one solid plastic object. You can remelt them as many times as you want, or you can just leave it as is and paint it and do whatever you need to for your costume. Wonderflex is another great one to work with. It's a little bit cheaper than the next one that we'll talk about. It's great for geometric shapes and anything that doesn't necessarily have a lot of curve to it, even though it can be heated up to be in whatever shape you need. So things like domes and whatnot, they're not going to be good for this, despite the name. Warbler is the one that you would want for doing things like domes or anything that would have a lot of curve. Originally, it came as just generic Warbler, but since cosplay has becoming more common in pop culture, they've actually come out with a lot of new types. So we have the new Warbler Black and Warbler Clear. Warbler Black is a little bit more high-end, but it has way less texture on the surface, so a lot of the time you don't even need to seal it. Warbler Clear is, as like the name states, clear.
A little bit more about thermoplastics. Thermoplastics self-adhere to each other and do not need glue. Most thermoplastics can be used together, so you can take scrap of Worbla and stick it to some Wonderflex. The great thing about thermoplastics, particularly Worbla in general, you can heat it up and just melt the scraps back together. People have put them through clay presses to flatten them back out again. So it's really great for making the most out of how much you have to pay for it, so none of your scraps go to waste. Worbla is also great because it can be bent, pressed into, wrapped around just about anything. It's stretchable, and as Frag mentioned, it can be used for round pieces. You can also stack it, which a lot of people, when they do general armor making, will take a little piece of Worbla scrap and use it to design a raised area on the armor, like around the edges. Worbla is also great because you could use it in a vacuum press. So anyone who has one of those, you can just mold it around your vacuum form shape. And for adding a little bit of detail on some thermoplastics, it's pretty common to use epoxy sculpt. Back in the day, Bondo was popular, and it's not used so much anymore, but both can be used to hide seams, but they will add weight to your project. That little bit really does add up. Continuing on with thermoplastics, we have some thermoplastic tools, many of which you've already used or have from the cutting or the foam phase. That includes the heat gun. You have to have a heat gun to work with thermoplastics, with the exception of the pellets, but you need the heat gun to soften and activate the thermoplastic so you can bend it, adhere it, etc. Personal favorite of mine is a silicone baking sheet. Make sure it's one that can go into the oven, because then it's strong enough to withstand the heat gun. It'll just save your counters and floors and wherever you're working. Scissors, depending on the thickness of the piece you're working on, work just fine. Again, you're going to dull them really fast, so you're a little bit better off with an X-Acto. Once again, we recommend having either replacement blades or a blade sharpener on hand. And a base material. Thermoplastics can be used without a base, but we highly recommend wrapping them around your foam pattern. It's going to strengthen the pattern and kind of give it like an armored shell versus just using straight thermoplastic. You're going to end up spending so much money. If you try and layer it, if you use it without any kind of base, such as foam, then it's going to be extremely floppy and have a chance of giving way.
There are a lot of different things that you can do to seal thermoplastics. In fact, a lot of them you don't even have to seal them. So like Worbla Black, they claim that it's smooth enough that you don't necessarily have to put a sealer on it. But should you choose to use one, the two most common types are gesso, which is usually considered a canvas primer, but it's basically a form of like a plaster or paste that you paint on in layers and then you smooth it down, and it can be smoothed down to almost a glossy finish. The only thing to be wary of with with gesso is that if you put it on an area that's going to be any kind of bend, it may potentially chip off. So just be considerate of that. The other type is PVA or wood glue. Wood glue behaves similarly to Mod Podge. You would put it on in the same exact sort of way. You just apply it in thin layers and let each layer dry. And then once it's dry, it has a nice smooth finish.
And don't forget about FlexBond as well. Like I said earlier before, FlexBond heavily advertised and even puts on its bottle that it is for Worbla. You can use it for EBA, but it is known for being used for Worbla as well. So keep that in mind too.
And here we have a couple of thermoplastic build examples. The first one there is Starscream. That's one of mine. The entire costume was made out of Wonderflex. The second two that are work in progress pictures belong to Sparks for a Rodimus cosplay that was yet to be finished. I'm excited to see it when it is done. The next one belongs to Lunatron on DeviantArt. And finally, we have Kittenfishes on Twitter, who did the Rat Trap costume from earlier as a foam build. This is the same costume that they actually remade out of Worbla.
And now we have different paints that you can use for your rigs. So we have Rust-Oleum spray paint. This is the paint that I personally used on my cosplay. I'm not sure if Frag and Sparks are going to want to chip in as well, but what paints that they used. And we have Plaid FX. It is a newer paint that has been around, but it is designed specifically for cosplays, which is really, really cool. And then we have Folk Art acrylic paint. Guys, what paint did you use on your cosplays?
Well, I would say that varies by the costume. Some of them I use the Rust-Oleum. Particularly with the Rust-Oleum, you want to make sure it's For plastics, if you're going over Plastidip or any kind of thermoplastic, tends to work a little bit better, in my experience anyway. And then the acrylic paint, I like the Folk Art brand. You can find it at any craft store. Any acrylic paint brand will work, but I would say stay away from the super cheap ones. They tend to be a little bit runny, and you don't want runny paint on your costume. You might get lines or drips, as well as you're going to need even more layers.
I personally like to do a lot of airbrushing and hand painting on my costumes, so I tend to stick with the tube paints, mostly the folk art paints. But I'm very excited to try the Plaid Effects paints because their primary advertising point is that they are a flexible paint. So that'll be great to try on a foam build one day.
And we have other additional methods too. We have the fabric over foam method. You guys may have remembered that, as you can see in the picture by our amazingly talented cosplayer Robin from Cutter's Table. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook. This was a very popular method for TFA. I'm not sure if it's making a comeback or not, but I kind of hope it does because it's a really cool, unique method. And it's when you have a foam build, and it's usually upholstery foam or EVA foam, and fabric is covered over it to create a uniform color and surface finish. Upholstery foam is squishy and flexible like fabric, so mobility won't be limited like it often is with rigid builds. And spandex or vinyl fabric is most commonly used. It could be painted and airbrushed for even more detail. Again, this was very popular for TFA because of their unique smooth designs. Really, really, a lot of beautiful cosplays was made out of this method. So we have more pictures from Robin, which is really awesome. Robin sent us a bunch of pictures here of examples of the process with fabric over foam. So you could see how they started with the foam and they built that out and they put the fabric on top of it. And it's really, really cool to see the process of this. But these are great photo examples. And we have a couple more pictures of Robin's cosplays. We have the Optimus Prime, the Bumblebee, and the Black Arachnia.
Of course, there's other additional methods as well. This one here we call scrapping or splicing. Lockdown from the movies is by Archis7, and this build was made with a lot of scrapping. You could see in a couple pictures here he provided for us how he assembled part of the cosplay here using just bits and pieces of things he had around. It's really an interesting method. I've seen a lot of it over the years. Sometimes people use those little kid cars, the small ones, and cut those up to make rigs. It's a very creative process, just using what you can find.
A slightly newer form of making cosplay that has popped up recently is 3D printing. To break down the process, it consists of creating an image in a 3D space on a computer and then using a 3D printer to print it out in layers to create a 3D object. The filaments available for printing come in different materials. A lot of them are a form of plastic, but some of them have wood pulp in them. They come in a variety of different colors, as well as transparent type colors and silicones or silicone-esque materials. Once a print has been made, it can often have print lines on it still, which are just small grooves that cover the surface. These can be smoothed very easily by using a type of resin called XTC 3D, or by using a spray body filler primer, usually by the brand Rust-Oleum, and then sanding it. Another really useful method for making costumes or costume pieces is by using molds and resin. Usually clay or some other medium is used to create your mother's shape. So in the example here, we have a raptor head, and silicone is poured over the shape to create a mold. After the mold's been pulled off, resin gets poured into the mold to create a hard plastic copy. This can be used for a variety of different things, including helmets, accent pieces for the costume itself. So potentially if you had like a certain shape on the chest that you needed to duplicate several times, you could make a mold of it and cast resin into it. Resin can be sanded, painted, and drilled, and it comes in many different colors, including clear, and can be colored in all different types of pigments, dyes, and tints.
Okay, so I believe we touched on this just a little bit way earlier in this closet cosplay, which is anything you can find in the closet, thrift store. It's your cheaper method, but you can still get some pretty awesome helm or human formers with it. It's one of my personal favorites, which you've seen in Swindle several times. You can use everyday clothes or accessories you already own. You can also include additional handmade pieces like armor pieces, wings if you're a seeker, a crown, whatever you feel fits the style.
And here's a couple secret additional tips and tricks that I've heard throughout the grapevine. If your EVA foam is a little bit sticky feeling after that spray paint's dried, if you gently buff it with, believe it or not, Podge furniture polish, that's right, the Podge, it's actually going to take that stickiness away, and it's also going to make the cosplay nice and smooth and polished and shiny, and it's going to take away the paint smell. It's a great way to get rid of that paint smell. And if you want to buff your rig even a little bit more after that, you can use a car spray wax, and it's a really nice touch. It'll make it nice and shiny and even more smoother. Like, who doesn't want a smooth rig? Especially when you're packing that up, you don't want those pieces sticking to each other and possibly ripping paint off. So it is actually really good to get that stickiness off, and these two tricks will help with that. I would highly recommend for both the Podge and the car spray wax to use a microfiber cloth. It's really super nice and soft. You can get that through Chemical Guys or a car shop or anything like that. But yeah, definitely use a microfiber cloth. And you can use car sticker decals for the Autobot, Decepticon, and any other symbols that might be difficult to paint onto the cosplay, like, the decals that you stick on a window. That's what I did with my Ratchet rig, which is why the medical symbols and the Autobot symbols are so clean. They're actually decals that I had custom made for the cosplay. Please, 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 please stick the decals on before you use Podge or spray wax, because then it's going to be just too glossy and it's not going to properly stick. And of course, when you use decals, always follow the directions, because if you don't follow them properly, you're going to improperly stick a decal on, and you really don't want a messed up, bubbled up decal on your painted cosplay. And I also would recommend not putting the Podge or the spray wax over the decal. Don't do that either.
Some other tips and tricks that can really help push your costume the extra mile are the lights. Now, lights can be done the easy way or the hard way. For the easy way, there's several store-bought options that you can incorporate, like singular LED lights. These usually come in the form of just one single LED light with a button battery and an on-off switch. They're great for tossing into little places like a gun or for eyes. EL wires, strips, panels, LED packs, and fans are also all available for purchase in places, and they're compatible with plug-and-go battery packs. And this makes it really easy to glue down something and make a really cool looking light effect with little to no effort. Next is the hard way though. You need to know how to solder for this, but basically you use a controller board and you can customize an entire light rig throughout your entire costume for some pretty incredible and sometimes even interactive effects. There's a company called Adafruit that makes resources like this available with countless tutorials for beginners, so it's definitely worth checking out if you're willing to practice and learn how they work. Also, I'm sure many of you have seen this image floating around, but it is a lie. Frog juice has been rumored to be some miracle product for cosplay, but it is nothing of the sort. Trust me, it's not worth your time or money.
A couple things to consider while working on your cosplay. Humidity, drying times, have a huge effect on paint and sealers. High humidity makes things take longer to dry. It can also affect the drying times of things like contact cement. Your house temperature also can play a role in this. Some paints and other materials need to be used over or under a certain temperature. It's very important to read your labels. Next up, pet hair, or pets in general. Pet hair gets into everything. Try to work in a pet-free area if you can. If you can't, I recommend shutting your pet out of the room you are working in. It prevents paw prints, hair, and it keeps your pets safe, because some of the items you may use, such as adhesives, paints, etc., are not safe for use around animals or children, or pretty much anybody who can't wear a respirator. And following that up, children. Watch children. Adhesive paints generally don't mix well with little kids, so try and keep your children out of the work area as well. You will also get injured. It's going to happen no matter what you do. Learn how to use a box cutter. Cut away from yourself. Keep fingers out of the way. I really recommend keeping a small med kit or some band-aids at the very least. Me personally, I have mortal enemies with the X-Acto blade, and it has bitten me on probably every project I've ever made.
Giving life to a character. Expression. It applies to both masked and unmasked characters. You want to practice your expressions in the mirror and see what you like best. Take pictures and reference from them. Test out a few different expressions on your prototype helmet to see which one you like best or which best represents your character. You can draw a few different templates and before you commit to anything on foam, and you could stick them on there to help get a better feel of what it would look like on the helmet. And you could do makeup to change your features. You can add or subtract age with makeup, give yourself scars, make yourself more masculine or feminine. The possibilities really are endless. Continuing it, you can also do performance. We have Robin from Cutter's Table again in the picture doing that. Performance isn't required, and not every convention, if you are cosplaying in a cosplay contest, requires it either, but it can help push the character to an extra level. How does your character normally behave? What's the body language, especially in photos? Every picture should tell the viewer exactly what kind of character you are. Are you friendly? Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you happy? Poses. That you can really exaggerate yourself, especially in a full build. I know certain builds can be a little difficult, but if you can get enough mobility, which you do want mobility, of course, then try to give yourself a fun pose. And acting, of course. Roleplay as your character, try to get in touch with their personality, study their speech patterns, quirks, and all the rest of that.
Can and will happen. We have a whole list of things here that have happened to all of us involving our costumes and the things that have fallen off of them or come close to it. So something that you should keep on hand if you can is a repair kit for your costume. Hot glue and super glue are your best friend. You never know when a strap or some other part is just going to randomly come undone while you're out on the floor, and having a handler nearby who happens to have some super glue in their bag for you to put that piece back on real quick will really be a savior.
Now we're moving into a category that I feel is super important, and these are safety tips. We're going to start with breathing and heat management. Now, this goes for both Humanformers and rigs, as well as pretty much any type of cosplay. You want to watch out for signs of heat stroke. You yourself may not be aware, but maybe those around you will be. Maybe you'll catch someone else who's experienced symptoms and you can get them help before they pass out. Commonly, confusion, dizziness, fainting or wobbling on their feet, fatigue, headache, muscle or abdominal cramps, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. These are your most common symptoms, and having suffered heat stroke several times myself because of cosplay, it's something you really need to be aware of. It can be very dangerous. You want to try and build airflow into your helmets. Lack of oxygen can aid in heat stroke since the heat has no way to escape. If you're building a foam helmet and your only way for the heat to escape is out the bottom where your chin is, you may want to consider hiding some vents elsewhere to help that heat dissipate. Another really important thing, if you're in a mech rig or vision impairing helmet where your vision is limited, get yourself a handler. Handler is a friend or someone you trust that acts as your eyes while you're in suit, rig, etc. They help guide and assist you with things like doors, steps, crossing the street. A good handler has an eye on their charge at all times and keeps aware of any needs or assistance the one in suit may have. Make sure your charge is hydrated. Can't stress this enough. Make sure they stop for breaks and have water. Heat stroke is very real and can happen extremely fast. The next thing you know, they're on the floor and you need help. It's also very important to keep an eye out for anyone trying to mess with the person in cosplay. You have limited vision, and say you're in a costume like Prowl who has door wings. You may get someone who thinks they're being funny and comes up behind and starts messing with those door wings or something. So try and keep an eye out for anybody who wants to mess with the rig or cosplayer. They could unintentionally hurt the person in the rig, suit, etc. And do watch out for small children in front of a rig. Your charge can't see them, and both the person in cosplay or the child can get hurt. Speaking from experience, I've had small children run over and hug onto me and had to freeze in place until they let go and were collected. A little bit more safety tips. This one in particular, I'm very passionate about, very serious about for my many years of cosplay. This one covers gender bending for F to M cosplays, and this is about chest binders. So chest binding, do's and don'ts. A good chest binder is always a good go-to. Avoid super cheap ones. Chances are they'll end up hurting you after a while. If it's really cheap, it's generally not to be trusted. Pictured on the right, a good binder will take you from having breasts to a nice pec look, perfect for cosplay. It's already a tried and true tool used by many transgender individuals. Just make sure you do your research before buying one. Do not ever, ever, ever use duct tape. Duct tape will melt to your skin with your body heat and cause great injury when trying to remove it. I cannot stress this enough. I used to see it a lot back in some earlier days when crossplay was just starting out. Never, ever, ever put duct tape on your skin. It will melt to your skin. Athletic tape is also not recommended. Try and keep it only on your hands, maybe your ankles if needed, but don't use it for binding. It's not meant for that, and it can also cause damage. And very briefly, I will touch on the ACE bandage. Also not recommended. This can also cause a lot of chest and breathing pain the longer you wear it. It's not designed for binding, so please don't use those either. Please look into chest binders.
And coming from safety tips, we're going to share some repercussions to not building cosplay properly. I actually have, a few of you might know, a big old scar on my nose from improperly gluing the inside part of my Ratchet Rig's nose. There is still a little scar there. I had gotten, after TFCon Toronto 2019, a terrible scab on my nose from the constant rubbing from the wrong kind of glue. Do not use super glue on any sorts of inside parts of your rig's helmet, because that's the repercussions from it. So going forward, when I do wear this helmet now for long times, I actually have to put a band-aid on that part of the nose to protect it from rubbing. And also with my rig, if I wear it too long, it actually hurts my shoulders, where if I pull it off, my shoulders are very stiff and very, very, very sore, because I'm overextending my shoulders for the way I built it. So what Frag was saying earlier in building a costume and making certain parts bigger to make it look like it worked, but while also building it around your body for safety concerns, definitely take that seriously, especially if you are planning on wearing that cosplay for quite some time.
Something else to keep in mind is to know your body's limits. My first mech rig was my Prime Starscream costume, and I had built the feet of that costume off of some cheap high heels that I bought from a Goodwill. And the first time I wore that costume was at a huge event. It was Otakon, and I wore it for the entire day of the convention, thinking that the pain that I was feeling in my feet to the point where I was ready to collapse would just go away the next day. Turns out that wasn't the case, and I ended up giving myself permanent nerve damage in the balls of my feet that I now have to live with for the rest of my life. If you're experiencing pain in any way while you're in costume, you need to listen to what your body's telling you. Don't just ignore it thinking that that'll just be the end of it.
And to follow that up, please don't overdo it in your cosplay. Listen to your body. I have suffered heat stroke multiple times, which I've touched on before, thanks to the hot and humid summers in very heavy cosplay. If you're starting to overheat, just take it off or go back to your hotel room, take a break. Don't forget to get water. Those photo shoots are not worth getting heat stroke for.
And now we're actually going to start taking some live Q&A here. So we will be on in 1 second, and then we can start answering some questions. So hope to see you. Buddy, so quick heads up, we only have about 5 to 10-ish minutes to answer Q&A here because the panel was long. So please start giving us some questions here so we can answer them as quickly as we possibly can. So start throwing questions at us. How do you make a helmet you can see out of?
That's a really great question. So hi, the one wearing the helmet right now. A lot of my tricks are actually coming from the furry community, which I'm actually a part of. And there is a material called buckram. You can usually find this at a fabric store. And when you color, you want to color the side that faces inside black, so that way you can see out of it. And then with Swindle, the outside is where his pupil and the purple is. Also, most kinds of cross-hatching material will work as well. If you're not sure, just go to the craft store, pick it up, and look through it.
All right, so next question, why exactly should I not use super glue in my helmet? Well, it's not the fact of don't use the super glue, it's my helmet's there. Don't use it around the nose region. I used it to hold together the inside parts of Ratchet here, the optics, and that part right here, there's super glue, and super glue dries very, very rough. So what happened was it was rubbing my nose, and you probably won't see it because I have makeup on, but it left a really bad scar. If you don't believe me, I can show you the pictures one day of the terrible scab that happened TFCon weekend from that. So you can use super glue, just don't do it in this region, and make sure you ventilate first, let it air out first before putting it on your head, or else that's going to make you dizzy. Okay, next question. For the Human Former designs, what was the most unique / hard fabric you ever used?
For me personally, pleather for Rodimus.
Admittedly, all of my Human Formers are thrift store outfits. I make all the armor and focused on that instead.
Mm-hmm. We got a very important question, actually. How long should someone wear a cosplay during the day? That is a great question, actually.
So a huge factor with that is going to be the weather and temperature that you're forced to be in for whatever climate. So some conventions during winter, you can stay in the rig for a lot longer, but other conventions during summer, you'll be lucky if you get an hour out of it. As soon as you start to feel any form of discomfort, or you are not able to keep fluids in your body with the rate of which you're sweating, or just in general, like I wouldn't recommend more than an hour in a hot climate.
Make sure you drink water no matter what climate you're in. It's very, very important to stay hydrated in cosplay.
And please, please, please have a handler with you, because it's really hard to take off your helmet so you can breathe. You're gonna need to take breaks, especially if you're competing in cosplay contests where you have to stay in that rig for a while. What is any tips for when you're really short but want to cosplay a taller character? Yes, you can add platforms to your to the bottoms of your feet. Sparks here definitely wants to answer that question. Please do.
So I am a whopping 5'1". I'm a very small person. As Chally said, you can do platforming. The Rodimus rig I'm working on actually has probably a 6-inch platform built into the natural foot. You do want to be really careful with any kind of platforming, balance and whatnot. You don't want to twist your ankle, fall over, break your arm. Me in general, I just kind of cope with it because I'm short. That's how it is.
And if you want to, you can wear heels, but again, as mentioned in my nerve damage story, make sure you have the appropriate like insoles or whatever it is that you need for your body to make sure that your feet are getting the proper support.
All right, it looks like we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. How do I prototype a helmet with paper, if that's even possible?
Trial and error.
I
Time.
actually used measurements in mine, but I think Frag just goes at it.
Yeah, and another trick that you can use is you can build half of the helmet pattern and then just mirror it for the other half. That way it's symmetrical.
And somebody had asked, this is going to be our last question, guys. Is it possible to make a cosplay using mostly 3D printed parts if it's viable? Frag, I know you were talking about that. It is possible, correct? You can print out smaller pieces and start putting them together.
Yep, absolutely. A great glue to use to adhere those pieces together, at least for PLA filament, is just plain old super glue. But again, if you're using it for a helmet, make sure you're putting it in appropriate places.
Yes. All right. So unfortunately, that's all the time we can take here. So you can hit us up on one of our social medias. We put it in the beginning, but we will see you. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining us.